Welcome to Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month, also known as HISAM. HISAM is an annual event dedicated to educating and mobilizing the residents of Hawaii to protect our islands from the threats posed by invasive species. Join us throughout the month of May for educational webinars, local volunteer opportunities and events, and HISAM Community Awards. To learn more and watch previously recorded webinars from earlier this month, you can visit the DLNR website, which we'll put a link in the chat. And if you're watching via Zoom, you're going to see that. Otherwise, if you're watching this via YouTube later as a recording, it's dlnr.hawaii.gov/HISC/HISAM2025, and you'll see the whole list there. This year's themes involves what's at risk, from the health of our watersheds and marine ecosystems to our cultural practices and food security. Invasive species threaten the foundation of Hawaii's well-being. Join us to explore and celebrate the unique places, people, and biodiversity throughout the Hawaiian archipelago and the vast Pacific Ocean, and learn how we can help restore balance and build resilience for generations to come. I am Kim Rogers with Kauaʻi Invasive Species Committee, and today we're here to talk about protecting seabirds in a world of biological invasions. Invasive species like rats, cats, and non-native plants pose major threats to seabirds, especially on islands. This webinar explores some of Hawaii's unique seabirds and how these threats affect nesting colonies and habitat, and highlights successful conservation strategies such as predator control, habitat restoration, and biosecurity that offer hope for seabird recovery. Our guest presenter today is Dilek Sahin with Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project, also known as KESRP. Dilek is a seabird biologist with a strong background in conservation. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology and a Master of Science in bird ecology, and earned her PhD in the conservation genomics of the Mediterranean shearwater, all from various Turkish universities. Since 2010, Dilek has worked on seabird conservation projects across Europe and most recently here on Kauaʻi. Her work has focused on protecting endangered seabirds through research and management, predator control, biosecurity, reducing light pollution and fisheries bycatch, and encouraging behavior to change to support conservation. And so now welcome, Dilek, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Kim, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for your time and interest. As Kim mentioned, I'm going to talk about seabirds today and what we do to protect them here on Kauaʻi. I will share my screen. And then turn it into full.
That looks great. I can see it.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thanks for confirming. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I'm coordinating the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project, and I'm going to talk a bit what is our mission in the middle of the presentation. But Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project is a state program for the endangered seabirds on Kauaʻi, and we are also part of the University of Hawaii system. All of our staff are hired by the university. I'll start with introducing these species that we work on. The program is mainly focusing on the endangered species, and we have 3 endangered species, listed species on the island of Kauaʻi. And threatened and endangered species means basically their population is under risk of extinction in relatively short time in comparison to other species, and therefore we need to protect them. You know, we need to be a bit more serious in our conservation efforts on these species. But the first species is ʻAʻo, the Newell shearwater, and for all the species you can see the distribution maps underneath the photographs, and you can see on the Hawaiian Islands it's mostly on Kauaʻi, but also there is some smaller populations on the island of Hawaii and then Maui as well. But really the 90% of the whole Hawaiian island population lives on Kauaʻi for the Newell shearwater. And one thing to mention for all these 3 species is the third one, ʻAkēʻakē, is more global. They have global distribution, but the 2, the Newell shearwater and Hawaiian Petrel, are only found on the Hawaiian Islands. So when you think from this perspective, Newell shearwater, actually, like just having 90% of the Newell shearwater population on Kauaʻi, it's kind of almost endemic to the Kauaʻi Island. We have a big responsibility for this species here. The second species is ʻUaʻu, the Hawaiian Petrel. And again, you can see on the map that it has some distribution on the other islands. There is a big population on the Maui Island, and then also the interior part of Kauaʻi. And again, Kauaʻi holds a large population for the Hawaiian petrels, and they're actually much easier to find in Shearwater. I'll talk about it a bit more again soon. But yeah, it's also, again, for big responsibility for Kauaʻi. The third one, ʻAkēʻakē, the Band-rumped Storm-Petrel, as I said, is more of a global species, but we have a Hawaiian subspecies that is considered endangered here. And the distribution, although it shows it is distributed on most of the islands, it's actually one of the most enigmatic species. So obviously it's difficult to tell the size from these photographs, but ʻAkēʻakē is almost like a little bit larger than the invasive sparrows here, house sparrows. So this is a teeny tiny species, dark species, and considering these seabirds are only active at night, and most of them found in challenging nesting habitats, which I'll show soon, finding ʻAkēʻakē on Kauaʻi is quite challenging. We know where they are keep calling, but unfortunately we don't have any accessible breeding colony yet. So therefore our management on this species is completely different than the other two. So when we are talking about these species, one really important thing to mention is how much habitat is available to these species on the island of Kauaʻi. And there's this scientific study done by Troy and friends, and they have basically used the current habitat characteristics that we have here. When we are working in the colonies, we collect data on habitat characteristics and nesting site characteristics of these species. And then when you use these characteristics and model them based on what habitat is available across the island, you come up with suitable nesting habitats. So the dark areas on the map that you see are the suitable nesting habitats for these two species. And you can, if you know Kauaʻi, you know that they are mostly restricted to the interior mountains of Kauaʻi. And we know once these species in the very old times probably distributed all around the island, whereas now their distribution is mostly limited to the interior mountains. And the darker the color, black, means higher probability of finding these species in these areas. And for Hawaiian petrels, you can even see like it's even narrower. They have more specialized choices, more like a narrow range for their nesting habitats. Most of this limited habitat is really driven by habitat destruction and habitat loss basically to the invasive species. And we'll talk more about it, plants, but also animals, right? So for example, hope you can see my cursor here. In the south part here, for example, these habitats are, yes, suitable for Newell shearwater, but these habitats are also mostly really invaded by pigs, feral cats, dogs, anything basically bothering these species. So that the habitat is suitable doesn't mean that species will thrive here. We still have a lot to do in these habitats. But this is really just to give an idea how limited the suitable habitats for these species on the island. And if we look at the nesting habitats, again, these are mostly remote mountain sites. They look beautiful, they feel beautiful. I feel very privileged to be able to visit these sites. Most often these sites are super challenging to access. We often use helicopter access to go to these sites, but you can see these are like one of the most pristine habitats on the island of Kauaʻi. But I also want one thing to take away from these photographs is how challenging they look in terms of access, and then we'll see how many invasive species are actually accessing these habitats to, unfortunately, take seabirds. In these habitats, these birds are nesting in the burrows, in the deep, dark burrows, and they are mostly on the ground. So the burrows are either like they have a rock base like this, or they are under the tree roots. And the second photo with the tree root is, if you pay attention, it's an ohia root system, actually. It also shows the connection between these species and the native ecosystems, right? So it's not just to it's not about just protecting these individual species, but also their habitat. Because if we cannot protect ohia, it means their breeding habitat availability will be less and less. So there's a big connection between these species and the native ecosystems here. And we will also talk about how they are contributing to these native ecosystems. But these burrows are most often narrow and deep. And it's one of the strategies that these birds use against predators. The more predator activity in the area, they have tendency to dig deeper. So then the predators cannot really reach them. But yeah, this is kind of protecting them in deep and dark burrows. And they dig their burrows. So let's look at the pair activity. When I say they dig their burrows, both pairs of the same species unites in the colony at the beginning of the breeding season, and they do their cleaning, burrow digging, and then hold their territory, right? And then this is like the start of a big investment throughout the breeding season. And I want to talk about this because we will see when they have such a big investment, what does that mean when an invasive species takes their one and only egg, for example? But here you can see they really spend most of their time just keep cleaning the burrow entrance. This is a nice rainy night for them. And what else to do in a rainy night but tidying up your home, basically. And this is the Hawaiian Petrel. One of them is just going back to the burrow. Yeah, they're really cute. Okay, so inside the burrow, they lay their single egg and raise their single chick. Again, there is this Hawaiian Petrel on the top incubating an egg, and then later we have the cute fat chick coming to life and then occupying the burrow, sometimes even becoming larger than the parent before they really fledge. The parents are doing a really good job. Both of the parents invest in raising the chick. So that means they take turns. For example, in incubation, female comes, lay the egg, right? And then the male takes the first incubation shift. Then he will incubate probably 2-3 weeks while the female is out at sea trying to recover from the big investment that she made to create that egg, because everything takes a lot of resources from them. Their egg is large, for example, relatively in comparison to other species. So that takes a lot of nutrition from the female. So she really needs to go and recover from that. And then she comes back, takes the shift, and then she starts her 2-3 weeks. While during these 2-3 weeks, the male was fasting in the burrow. They are basically going into this almost deep sleep in the burrow. Sometimes when we are checking the burrows, we stick a small handheld camera to take a photo of the burrow, because most often these are so deep that we cannot see through from the entrance. So when we are doing that, sometimes they don't even wake up. They are sleeping so deep sometimes inside. That's really a fun fact about them, but of course not all of their time spent sleeping. They're just kind of on hold, slowing the metabolism probably and waiting for other couple to come back. And once the chick hatches, then the first few days are spent with the chick by the parents, and the parents are usually invest great amount of, again, time and energy into keeping the chick alive in these first few days. And then slowly, as the chick grows, a few, maybe even a week or a little bit longer age, they start to leave the chick alone and just go and find food for the chick. And then in turn, again, they come to the nest, feed the chick with whatever they found out in the ocean. And here's a Newell Shearwater on the right side. Again, the couple unites. This is the beginning of the breeding period where you see the couples inside. And then they also copulate at the breeding colonies most often. And then they lay their single egg. And here you can see actually how big the egg is relatively in comparison to their body size. And then this is the chick, but it's coming to later stages. You can see that the feathers are already grown, and then they are trying to shed the down feathers. Okay, this is inside the burrow. So what is our problem exactly here? So I mentioned the burrows are deep and in the forest, and I showed you the photographs of these sites, how inaccessible they look from a distance at least. But surprisingly, we find feral cats, rats, pigs, dogs, and every single invasive introduced species on the island, mammals. that are aiming for these seabirds in these areas. So here, these are coming from our burrow cameras. I'll show you a photo of it. We do some passive monitoring of the burrows. So basically, when we are not in the colonies, we still have an eye on the burrows and understand what's happening. Here's a good, nice feral cat coming and visiting a burrow and probably sniffing the seabird. So they know that there's food inside. And then if the burrow is not so deep, if, for example, if it's this is speculative, like if it's a young seabird couple, for example, sometimes they really, they're not that professional yet in their breeding performance. So they may dig much shallower, and then the cats are probably easily taking them. Or if it's a colony where it's not exposed to predators so much, then the birds don't have the tendency to dig so deep. These are also the colonies. If a like spontaneous cat event happens, a cat visits the colony, access the colony, they can take really large number of individuals, adults or the chicks from the burrows. And here on the right side, you actually see one of our cameras capture this image. The cat is taking an adult Newell shearwater from the burrow and pulling it and eating it, unfortunately. So the cat events are happening very frequently, not everyday event, but definitely frequent enough that it's definitely causing the whole colony to decline, and therefore needs to be controlled all the time. Another problem we have is our rats or mice, and these are more targeting the eggs because they are not, big enough predators to take adults or chicks. But again, I talked about how they lay only a single egg, and I talked about how big of an investment it is, right, for the female to form that egg. So because of that nutritional investment and time investment, if they lose the egg to a rat, for example, in the beginning of the season, they don't lay a replacement egg because it's just so much for them. I don't think there's any records from shearwaters or petrels, maybe one exceptional record in the literature, but they are really not laying the single egg. So that means that pair is basically skipping breeding that year. And when you consider these kind of life history traits, like basically what I consider seabirds are slow species, so their populations grow very slowly because of this reason, because they lay a single egg, and then turning that egg to a fledged chick takes like 7-8 months, and both parents are investing. So such a big energy investment and time investment. If that egg is gone, the pair is skipping, and imagine half of the colony is taken by rats, then basically that the growth of that colony is slowing down significantly. And if this happens over and over, basically we are losing the colonies in relatively short time in comparison to the life longevity of these seabirds, which they live, I think on average about 30 years. It's not still clear like how many years they live, but these kind of middle-sized shearwaters are mostly considered living more than 30 years. And here's a rat going into the burrow, one of the seabird burrows. Again, they are probably sniffing the eggs and the nutritions. And then here's one rat, again, captured by the burrow cameras, taking an egg and predating. These were the animal predators, and there's more. These are not just cats and rats, right? There are also barn owls, which is another introduced species here. There are also pigs. So there are many predator animals targeting these nests, but there's also the plant part of things. So again, introduced plants in these colony locations are problematic because they mostly modify the habitat and take over from these very limited suitable breeding habitats. So here we're looking at two photos. On the left, we have the introduced ginger cover in one of the colony sites that we are monitoring. And you can see that it's forming a really thick mat right next to the fence, and actually both sides of the ungulated fence. And this, with the rhizomes and everything, this really doesn't let anything to penetrate into the ground. So they are really aggressive from that perspective. Whereas this is the photo on the right is one of the colonies. We have more the native ground cover rather than ginger or invasive species. And you can see like it's really different than what we see with the invasive species. Once invasive plants or animals are in these colonies, they are really successful in increasing their spread. So if you're really not controlling them on time, not acting on time, then it's becoming a big problem. Like now, controlling this ginger is a really a lot of time and effort. I'm sure there are people who is doing ginger control on the islands in the audience that they know what I talk about. But ginger is not the only habitat modifying plant. There is also some other ones. There is also other plants that are not maybe as aggressively modifying the habitat, but they are still taking the space away from either native plants or from the burrowing seabirds in these habitats. Okay, I keep talking about problems, but we'll come to the more optimistic parts later on. Once we have the conservation actions, then we'll see there's actually good positive results. But one last thing to talk about problems. So based on all of these problems, but also more, of course, this talk is more focusing on the invasive species in the colonies and threatened and endangered species, but we also have other wide variety of other threats, like light pollution is one of them, or power line mortality, power line collisions on the island of Kauaʻi was one of them. So when these seabirds are nesting in the interior mountains and they have to fly from the ocean to their colonies, they keep passing these either light pollution areas or areas with the power lines. And when they don't see them at night, they either collide with the power lines or attracted to the strong artificial lights. These are also some of the mortality sources. So this declining trends that I'm going to talk about coming from our radar surveys are not only because of invasive species, but also other threats. I just want to point that out. So these are coming from, KESRP has been doing radar surveys since 1993. This is started by another team. And then since our initiation in 2006, we took over the radar surveys, and this is an ongoing survey since the basically 1993s. And this is one of the nicest, longest term data set that we have on the island of Kauaʻi on these threatened and endangered species, and it's telling us what happened over time to the number of species, because we have been doing these surveys systematically every single year, repeating from the same sites and with the same effort, same months, etc. And on the right side, we will be looking at the data coming from Save Our Shearwater's program. This program runs even further back. It was basically established to rescue and rehabilitate the fledgling seabirds that are grounded because of artificial light pollution. And the program was formed by the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, State of Hawaii here in 70s. And since then, they have been collecting fledgling data. And in both of the plots, the radar surveys or the fledgling data coming from Save Our Shearwater's program, you can see that the trend is really downward. So we keep losing these seabirds. We see fewer and fewer seabirds around the island of Kauaʻi. And sometimes this fledgling plot can be misinterpreted as, okay, if we're seeing less or fewer and fewer fledgling individuals because of light pollution, that's maybe an improvement in the light pollution, but it's not. Unfortunately, because of populations are shrinking, we also, but basically they are producing fewer and fewer fledglings on the island of Kauaʻi, right? So these two data sets are one of the most reliable data sets that we have today. We still continue radar surveys annually. And if we look at this radar chart in the last 1 or 2 decades, where we really intensify the conservation actions on the island and minimize the power line collisions, this is coming from the electric cooperative of the island. They are doing a mitigation project on that. We actually see stabilization of the trend. So this is really good news so far, at least. At least the decline is not as steep as in the beginning. So we start to see stabilization, and we are hoping with the increasing conservation effort, we will see even upward trends in the future. Okay, we talked about we're declining seabird populations and the problems why, but then why it's important. Why do we need to care about these seabirds? Well, the simple answer is they are ecosystem engineers, just like many other species. So when you consider the Hawaiian ecosystems, we're talking about all these forests and the diverse specification of the plants and everything. And then these islands are in the middle of the ocean, right? But when you think about the connection between the ocean and the land, the nutrient flow between these two ecosystems are actually not possible if there is no agent in between. So there should be an agent that is spending time on the land, but is also spending time out in the ocean using the marine resources and then coming back and using the land resources. So the seabirds are these agents, right? They go and feed out in the ocean. They take some of the very unique ocean nutrients like nitrogen, for example, which is a limiting factor on the land, and they bring it to the land. They just poop in the colonies in these forests, right? And that is a kind of fertilizer. Obviously, seabirds are not the only organisms engineering these ecosystems, but they are a really important part. I mean, historically, when you consider the life history traits of these species, like colonial, they form large colonies when they are, if you have been in a seabird island like Midway Atoll or Lehua Islet even, or I don't know, one of the colonies on Kauaʻi, you can have that feeling like, what does that mean to be in a seabird island? They are all around, there's poop all around, they keep, bringing stuff from the sea. So yeah, they are important component of these ecosystems. So if we lose seabirds from the Hawaiian Islands, the recovery of these ecosystems will not be as quick. But they are also, apart from engineering for the ecosystems, they are also culturally important in the Hawaiian culture, because they have been, it's known that they have been used in wayfinding or even fishing globally, but also here on the Hawaiian Islands. So they are, again, also culturally important. So we have many reasons, even just for the sake of species, we have many reasons to protect them. Okay, so what we do to protect them. So the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project implements research and conservation management. And our sole goal is really to reverse the population declines of this species. We want them to be recovered. And we have diverse set of monitoring, management, and research activities. Again, this is more focusing on the colonies and invasive species part. But one thing I want to, again, highlight here is that most of these sites are helicopter access only. So this is really making our work really challenging and also expensive, right? We fully rely on public funding to protect these species, but also we have limited funding and we have to use it very wisely. And when you're not able to access these sites very often as much as you want to, then what we do is we use passive monitoring methods. So here, first on this photo, you see the previous project coordinator, Andre, trying to check a burrow here, and you can see how deep the burrows are. And sometimes they are like right under the uluhe or under the ohia roots, and you really need to go into your half body sometimes. And Andre is a quite tall person, so he's quite dug deep into this burrow to check it. But what we do when we are not in these colonies and checking the burrows ourselves, we put cameras, motion sensor cameras that are capturing every single thing happening in the burrow. This is mostly helping us to understand the bird's behavior. The video we watched previously was coming from these cameras. Like we capture these important moments, but also it helps us to understand what invasive species, introduced predator species are visiting these burrows, and then if they are taking any birds. And of course, this is helping us to make more management decisions. Okay, maybe we have to intensify rat control around this, not just colony, but around this burrow as well. It seems like this is visited by the rats very frequently. Another passive method that we use is the sound recorders, automated sound recording systems. These are what we call song meters, and we place them in these colonies to mostly measure the call activity. So these seabirds are only active at night. I briefly mentioned that, but they also use vocalization a lot. They just communicate in the colonies. We don't know what they are communicating exactly. It's very hard to scientifically study it, but we know they are communicating some information. Colonies are really information centers. And what we do with these song meters is record that calling activity, and then over time, with, again, systematic effort, use that calling activity to understand if there's changing trends. Maybe we do conservation investment in one colony and we see an increase in the call activity, probably a good indication that there's increase in the number of nests. We also did a small study comparing the call activity to the number of nests on the ground, and they were, at least for the island of Kauaʻi, correlating nicely. This is another result you get in everywhere. It's the sound data is really challenging, and it's still an area in development as the technology is developing more. But at least for now, it's a good indication for us that, okay, the colony is increasing or decreasing based on the call activity. One other thing we do related to biosecurity and invasive species is that social attraction and colony enhancement. Again, because these birds are colonial and they vocalize a lot, we use these features to attract them to a site that we cleared from predators, and we want seabirds to be back or new species to be introduced. So we call this social attraction. We basically broadcast the call of the species that we want to attract to the site. And sometimes we also, just like in this scenario, we also place decoys and some other stimulus, like, for example, mirrors in this case are trying to mimic, like multiply these decoys. So decoys are placed around the mirror, and when a bird is flying up high, what it sees is, okay, there's 3 birds on the ground, but then based on the mirror reflection, there's actually 6 birds on the ground. So they see a crowded colony, and hopefully it will attract these birds to these sites. We are using the species behavior and these localizations for the social attraction projects, and it seems like it's working really well on the Hawaiian Islands so far. Another thing we do to protect these species is predator control and exclusion. There are several methods. Like predator exclusion can be done either by fully predator-proof fences, like we see on the left here. These fences are basically not allowing any rat, mouse, or cats, pigs, anything to enter except the avian predators like barn owls. They can come from the air, obviously. These are more, I think, costly to install and also maintain, but they are providing a wider protection for the colony. And some other fences here on the rightmost photograph is the angler fences. This is rather relatively more cost effective and also easier to install in places. As you can see here, the predator-proof fence has a huge area cleared from native plants here because we're trying to stop the incursions into the predator-proof fence, and therefore you need to clear a larger space that is filled with the native plants normally. But whereas in the case of ungulate fences, it's a bit less invasive method installing these fences. But these are only protecting against ungulates, and a rat or cat can go in. So these are 2 at least nice tools that we have across the whole Hawaiian Islands, and mostly different different teams are doing this kind of work. It's not just a small project work installing these. So we get help a lot from the state of Hawaii teams, but also teams like Pacific Rim Conservation, for example, is one of the leading teams in installation of these fences. And then there is Pono Pacific, and many other groups are doing this kind of work. What we do in the colonies is rat and cat control mostly, at least in our case, we focus on these 2 species only. And with the rat control, we mostly use A24, what we call good nature A24 traps. These are automatic traps. They work on carbon dioxide power, and then they can trigger with 1 cartridge. They can trigger up to 24 times, so we don't have to be there after every single kill to reset the trap. So this is kind of nice because we don't we just need to visit and check them every few months. They are working nicely when we are not in the colonies. But for the cat control, at least on the island of Kauaʻi, we're still not using lethal cat control methods or traps, but it's mostly cage traps, walking cage traps that we use here because we have so many seabirds in these colonies. If we have a lethal trap that is not selective, that is not able to recognize a seabird and tell it from a cat, then we have high chance of, unfortunately, mistakenly capturing these seabirds. So therefore we have to rely on, unfortunately, these walking traps. But one challenging thing about these is that we have to be in the colony in order to use these traps. They can be only active when people are in the colony, because obviously we cannot leave them open and leave the cat until our next visit in the site. So it's just to say, really, it's a slow process when we are controlling cats in these colonies. But all of these, when we implement these methods, use predator exclusion fences, use predator control, especially regularly, when you do invest regularly in these colonies, we're actually seeing positive results. And here we are looking at the breeding success of these 2 species. The reds are Hawaiian Petrels and the greens are Newell Shearwaters, from many different sites that the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project has been monitoring. But these data also continues to be collected by the KIU Sea Habitat Conservation Plan, by the Archipelago Research and Conservation Project program. And we can see, of course, there are some fluctuations, and these are mostly coming from small sample sizes. I believe in this colony, we have only 4 or so burrows monitored for Newell. So it's like small sample size impacting the results here. But others, when we have a good sample sizes, you can see the trend we see in their reproductive success is actually upwards since we started investing more and more in predator control with the methods that I just mentioned. So really, and as I said, the radar data trends are also showing relatively stable. So these are all coming together and telling us, yeah, when you do intensive management in these colonies, when you protect these habitats, protect these species, and then do a long-term monitoring, you see that the results are positive. From the plant side, these were mostly about the predator animals. So from the plant side, what we do is, at least in the Kauaʻi Endangered Seabird Recovery Project, we only focus on just a few species, but we are mostly cooperating with the state of Hawaii Native Ecosystem Protection and Management team to weed or to control ginger in the seabird colonies that we are working. Here we see like a recent application of ginger control methods. What we do is this on the left, you see a foliar application where we just apply a control agent on the leaves. And then this is just a month old, like this applied. And then in a month, we took this photo and you can see it's actually a really slow process. The foliage is dying, but it's slowly. And then on the other hand, you can go and chop these plants, which requires a lot of human resources in the field, and then cut the rhizome and then apply the reagent. So these two, as I said, taking human resources, but when you also consider that we access these sites only by helicopters, it's also becoming more challenging, right? Because normally the invasive, like weeding of invasive plants are mostly in the Hawaiian Islands, at least done by the power of volunteers. And I think there's a great volunteer network in every single island that helps the conservation programs. But here on Kauaʻi, unfortunately, it's a bit more difficult in the case of seabird colonies because we cannot take more than 3 people in one helicopter trip. And then also they are really expensive. So unfortunately, we have to rely on the project staff and also the state of Hawaii staff. On the third photo, this is from Lehua Island, and we are mostly controlling incipient weeds, so the plants that are just appearing now. So we're being really proactive, I guess I can say proactive, and trying to knock them down from the start before they spread widely. And here, one of the plant species that we mechanically removes basically, and here our volunteer Erica from Pacific Rim Conservation, she's actually quite a tall person, and you can see the amount of plants that we pulled in just a few hours, and we were really happy. And this was last year, and the plant actually has not come back yet, so that's also working when you keep your eye on it. And finally, we're also working on biosecurity, but this is mostly of the predator-free areas or islands. So when we talk about predator-proof fences, we talk about biosecurity. So basically trying to keep these places predator-free. And in order to do that, you need to really invest a lot of time in surveillance. So imagine the Lehua Island is 280 acres. You go there and you cannot really walk inch by inch to check for rats, right? So what we do rely on mostly is we check seabird burrows regularly on the island of Lehua and just look for marks of any rat predation. For example, if there's rat incursion on the island, then we'll likely see the impact on the seabird colonies. And so far, Lehua is still predator-free. The rats were cleared from the island, I believe 2017, but it declared rat-free in 2020. It's still rat-free. There's so much to do on the island, but at least it's great news that it's predator-free. And here we see the black-footed albatross. One of the Lehua was the single colony of black-footed albatross in the main Hawaiian Islands, and now that we have another one developing on Oahu based on translocations and social attraction. And on the other island, Mokuʻaʻi, we do the same work, biosecurity. Mokuʻaʻi is naturally predator-free. It's an amazing small rock and also full of native plants, which is amazing. Lehua has still a lot of invasive plants. And on Mokuʻaʻi, we do the same thing, biosecurity surveillance, and also we monitor. We have a social attraction projects running. I don't know if you can see, but these white dots on the island plateau is the social attraction nest boxes that we have. There's also sound system calling for Band-rumped Storm-Petrels here. We're trying to create an accessible colony. So far, we haven't had any birds on the ground, different species, yes, but not the band-rumps. And we're looking into our methods and see if we are doing something wrong. But here we use, on both of the islands, we use a lot of these passive monitoring cameras. We rely on them a lot. When we are not on the island, they monitor it for us for the rats. We also use tracking tunnels or like chew blocks for rats, for example, sometimes test these things on these islands. And again, so far, both of the islands are rat-free and Seabirds are seemingly thriving. We are still collecting data and hoping to publish very positive results from Lehua in the future. Finally, on these two islands, as I briefly said, social attraction projects, but here you can see one optimistic photo. So on the left, we have the tern social attraction site on Lehua. We are targeting sooty terns and grayback terns here. The speakers are here. This is the sound system with the solar panel on top, but we have the sound system and the batteries in it. So this broadcasts the sound all day long because they are not necessarily strictly nocturnal species. But again, we have the decoys and the mirrors imitating that there's a big colony on the ground. And then we have in the camera data, you can see that the actual live real sooty terns are on the ground right next to the decoys. That means it's kind of working. These tools are attracting the species, or in another case, right next to the speaker. And these speakers are amazingly loud. I really don't know how they are not bothered by this and just coming right next to the sound. But in any case, in also other social attraction systems that is run by different teams on the island, it seems like birds are really attracted to the speakers, so to the sound. And that was all from my side. Thank you again for your interest. This is our small crew doing all this work, with, of course, with the support of State of Hawaii. And we were on Lehua just a few weeks ago. This photo is from there. If you want to follow us, we are a bit slow, but updating our website. Please visit our website or follow us on Instagram. We are also on Facebook, and we'll be more active on the social media soon, hopefully. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dilek. Wonderful information. And I just want to encourage anybody who's here, if they have questions, I know I was jotting down comments and questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or even the Q&A, whatever's easier for you. And thank you, Kyoko, for your comment there. So first of all, social attraction using mirrors. I didn't know that that was being incorporated into, the use of social attraction. Obviously, I've always heard vocalization, but what a concept. And I'm glad to hear and see that it's working. And terns, right? I didn't know that we had been doing work to encourage tern nesting. And so fabulous. The other thing that I noted, I didn't realize Mokuʻaʻi was predator-free.
It is. It's an amazing
I find
place.
that fascinating. How did it stay predator-proof or predator-free? It's so close to the main island of Kauaʻi. I mean, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, we keep thinking that it's the ocean conditions are really rough, and the Mokuʻaʻi has a little bit like a kind of, it's a relatively high rock, and surrounding there's like a base with the tide pools and stuff. So we think that habitat, that area is so harsh with the waves and everything. We think it's preventing, because I know it's right off the Kilauea Point, the refuge, and refuge is full of rats. They are controlling rats, they're doing everything, but it's free. Yeah, which is amazing. I know, it's knock on the wood. Every time I go to Mokuʻaʻi, I was like, just fingers crossed that it's still free, but it seems like it's naturally a good barrier.
That's so great to hear. I would have expected that from Lehua, not Mokuʻaʻi. So wonderful. And I did receive a question directly. Can you speak a little more about the relationship between ohia root systems and seabird burrows? I particularly love this question since I work on saving ohia here on Kauaʻi. Do seabirds show a preference for burrowing near ohia over other trees? And if so, what characteristics do you think of these root systems might contribute to their suitability or the bird's preference?
It seems like apparently they are, yes, mostly choosing ohia, but I think I feel like when we are talking about these habitat characteristics, we're always looking a very narrow time point and current distribution. So when we look at, like, of course, ohia is a dominating canopy species across the Hawaiian Islands in most of the places, ohia and koa, right? But we also have koa dominating places here on Kauaʻi, for example, where we're still exploring these sites. We have mostly focused on wet forest, which is dominated by ohia as the program, but now we are also trying to explore more on the other type of habitats here on the island. So I cannot really say that we have or don't have them, but it's seemingly the activity is lower in these koa habitats, for example. But it, again, doesn't mean that there's something they don't like here, but it might be really related to predator activity, like pigs are also kind of dominating, or the goats, pigs, habitat modifying plants, also really prevalent in these koa habitats too. But coming back to ohia, yes, ohia roots are particularly so. It's kind of hard to describe for me as a second language in English too, but when you see an like entangled ohia root system, you often find burrows. So most often when we are trying to walk in these colonies and try to expand the colonies by finding more burrows, what we do is we watch for seabird cues, right? Smell, poop, feathers, whatever we can see. But sometimes we just see the burrows, like kind of a hole under an ohia, and then, oh, this looks like an amazing burrow, and then we go to only see that it's actually a shallow hole. So I think they are naturally providing them with burrows. And then the seabirds, yeah, what seabirds do is basically go there and dig deeper. So in most of the cases, especially Hawaiian petrels, we find more and more under ohia. Newell shearwater can also be found under ohia, but it's also associated with ulu ferns. But there's a question mark in my mind, again, being in the Hawaiian Islands for 2.5 years only, maybe someone can challenge me, but what I keep thinking is Hawaiian petrel is much more aggressive species than, and a bit larger species than Newell shearwater. I wonder if it's kind of excluding it from these ohia roots in the same areas that they are nesting together. I have no idea. We need to do a study to see it, but I keep finding them in these nice ohia roots, whereas Newell shearwater can sometimes be like more hidden deep under the ulu head, still digging the burrows. But yes, ohia is definitely providing like kind of natural burrows. They just need to do a little bit more work. When you think digging a burrow from start, it's much more work, right? But when there's something available already and you can dig a little bit deeper and go deeper, then why not? So I believe, yes, ohia is providing great breeding habitat for these species because of the physical features.
Yeah, and that is consistent with what I know about ohia. So for example, ohia seeds are individually each about the size of a single human eyelash, and ohia trees put out a profusion of ohia seeds. Their superpower is quantity over quality, is what I like to say. So when ohia seeds literally rain down on the ground, and say they might rain down on a fallen log or a twig, or a branch or something, and they start to germinate and sprout and they put their little fine roots out, it could be that they get their start on some other fallen log or twig or stick, and then that thing continues to biodegrade, but now the ohia has established itself over that. And so that could be how those little pukas or holes are offered or created, because I know you and probably many people on this call have seen in the forest these really unusual, like leg, if you will, root system and buttressing that ohia will do. And that, from what I know, is, so maybe it's happening as well on a smaller scale, and that gives them the opportunity for these openings. I love that. And also, since you mentioned distribution of the two different species of birds, from what I understand, and if you would just speak to the one-time distribution of these two species, and now we talk about them in our really remote areas because that's where they continue to survive as best they can. But were they once top to bottom? Like, would we have found both species here at the coastal elevations near where we all live?
Yeah, it is considered top to bottom. Personally, I don't know how strong the evidence is, but I know there's fossil evidence that is really, a good support for the Hawaiian petrels, as far as I remember, from the coast of some of the Hawaiian Islands. So yeah, they were from top to bottom considered. And I think one nice indication of it is we have in the Kilauea Point, if you know the Kauaʻi Island and the Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge, it's very much of the coastal side and the North Shore. And there was a cross-fostering project done in 70s, if I remember right. So they took the eggs of Newell shearwaters from some of the mountain sites that I showed you, and they put these eggs underneath wedge-tailed shearwaters in the coast and let them basically parent these. And Mokuʻaʻi was one of the sites, actually. They successfully raised chicks. Newell shearwaters came back to the sites and started nesting. But I believe in short time on Mokuʻaʻi, their eggs were predated by mynas. Again, another introduced and invasive species here. And so we don't have any breeding pair on Mokuʻaʻi anymore, but we still have remnant of this cross-fostering experiment living in Kilauea Point. Unfortunately, it's declining, the Newell shearwater, because of the wedge-tail shearwaters. They like, this is natural process, right? Wedge-tail shearwaters are really aggressive, much more aggressive than Newells, and then they are out competing and taking over the burrows, suitable burrows. So we are, unfortunately, it's seemingly the activity remains low. We don't have a huge colony, but at least it's a proof that they are able to live in these habitats. And also the Nihoku Ecosystem Restoration Project, we were part of it initially. Again, KESRP helped taking main from the mountain sites, and then these were basically raised by people in the coast here, and then translocated to a coastal site right next to the Kilauea Point, actually. And it seems like they're also returning to that site and nesting in nest boxes. So but just based on these, we know that their habitat selection can be much wider. It's just, again, we're looking at a snapshot now, and now it looks like very narrow. So therefore, it's more urgent to act.
Right. Yeah. Another question that I got directly to me was, do the A24 traps possibly attract barn owls due to the rat corpses?
Oh, the corpses. I have not heard anything. Not that we monitor every single trap with the camera. That's a good question, actually, but I have not heard any concern from anyone so far. I'm sure there are other teams doing predator control on the island. I'm sure there are traps that were monitored by cameras, and again, could be. I don't know if they are taking dead animals though, or if they're only going for live ones. That would be my question, but I'm not too sure about the answer. But it's a good question.
It is a good question, but I know that, more and more groups are using those A24 traps. So I would think that if that was becoming, an increasing issue or witnessed, we'd hear about it, right? Either from your program or Forest Birds or another island.
Yeah. And one thing I want to touch on about barn owls is, this is again speculative, not basing on any scientific observation, but barn owls are already in most of these mountain sites. And I believe a seabird is much more nutritious than a rat probably for them, although capturing a seabird might be more difficult. But again, I would question how important, to be worried about attracting them or not, since we know they are already around these sites. That would be another question that I don't know.
Yeah, you always have to weigh the balances, right? The pluses and the minuses, and yeah. Let's see. I think there's a question in the Q&A. Let me get to that. You shared a graph of fledgling count by year, which showed a moderate positive trend from 1979 to approximately 1993, and a strong negative decline from 93 to 2015. Any idea why such a stark shift in seabird fledglings in the mid-1990s?
That's a great question. Great capture. It's the Hurricane Iniki. Unfortunately destroyed. And why we are so lucky with these radar surveys, when the scientists started these surveys, it was just a year before Hurricane Iniki, and we obtained these huge high numbers. And then right after it, when they did the survey from the same exact locations on the island, the numbers were really much, like, significantly, seriously lower, and then they remain declining and they remain low. So that can also, I think it's a really good indication that, like, increasing frequency of these kind of events with the global climate change is actually making our job even more difficult, because one large-scale hurricane can destroy a lot of breeding habitat. And whatever we do, how many predator-proof fences we put, we'll face this in the end. So yeah, that's a great question.
It is a great question. And it brings to mind the idea of, especially in our forest birds, we talk about captive breeding, and, with the ʻAlala, we've actually translocated them in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Papahanaumokuakea. We are also translocating, bird species. And I think about the Newells, right, where you talk about 90% found here on Kauaʻi. And is there any talk of a program like that? I know we've translocated within the island, but I know that they are found or were found at one time on other islands. So is there talk of maybe trying to move some to another population on a different island?
Yeah, there were initial talks initiated by Pacific Rim Conservation and the group in Lanai. They wanted to do this project, translocating Newell Shearwater from Kauaʻi to to Lanai in the predator-proof fence area. And it's one of the, I think, larger fences in the Hawaiian Islands. And it's Hawaiian petrels are nesting there, but not the Newell Shearwater. So it sounds like a great place. But when we consider these kind of decisions, there are many things to come. The project didn't happen. We discussed it and then we decided to postpone it because of many logistical reasons. One thing is really, it's not, again, easy to access these sites. Like collecting these birds in the previous Nihoku ecosystem restoration project, KESRP collected, I believe, more than 100 chicks from these sites, but it was on its own a huge effort. It's basically, you need to follow every single chick. You need to make the timing great. Weather conditions can, stop you from anything basically. And then you need to make sure that chicks are safely translocated to the land to be raised by aviculturists. And like, it's a complicated and it's a huge project on its own, right? And also there are things like, do we have places where we can, if we translocate these birds, do we have places where we can protect them forever? Or are we talking about private lands? Like what happens if a private landowner changes? So I think that's a great idea and we should definitely do it. Kauaʻi definitely shouldn't be the only source for the Newell's shearwater population, especially with this conservation investment now. Having more birds on the ground thanks to this investment, we should start looking into it in the near future. But again, there will be many question marks around it. There will be many things to work on. And yeah, it's a super big project on its own. Translocations are not easy as far as I can understand here based on my learning. But one other thing related to that and based on my PhD project, so I did my PhD on genomics, right? Looking into the genetic diversity of a certain seabird species across the Mediterranean. So I would like to transfer it to here. And once because we have not done it in, I mean, there are genetic studies on these species, but it's very minimal and with now considered old school markers, DNA markers. So I guess one of the first priorities in KESRP is to repeat that with the new generation sequencing and technologies and, integrating all the computational sources and stuff, and then come up with, okay, what we are protecting here, what are the genetic diversity of the protected colonies? And if you want to do translocation, what kind of mix we want to have from these colonies? So that is, Endangered Species Act is, coming from Europe, I don't think there is such a strong conservation policy in the world. It's an amazing policy and hopefully we'll keep it, but it integrates genetic diversity into the conservation, at least on paper. So once you do it in the field, then you can use that genetic source to also decide on conservation management activities. So I'm hoping to see those days in the near future.
Yeah, that would be exciting. That does sound like a first step in that translocation effort. So it can help determine where you pull, birds and or where you take them, to increase the genetic diversity. Well, it looks like we have wrapped up. We're at 2:30, and I want to let you go, but I also want to thank you again very much. I also want to thank those people in attendance. And please, folks who are here listening live, know that we have more. Next week is our last week of Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month. There are some more talks happening. For those of you who are watching the recording, please check our playlist to see just a whole bunch more talks. I'm sure you'll find something interesting. And I, again, thank you again, Dilek.
Well, thank you too for the invitation.
Thanks to Beth behind the scenes. Sorry.